I never thought I'd end up in a fight over 3 feet of dirt in my own backyard. But that's exactly where this started, and honestly, it still feels unreal when I say it out loud. One day, my neighbor was building a dream house. The next day, he was standing in my yard telling me I didn't own part of it anymore. And the strangest part is how calm he was when he said it, like he was doing me a favor instead of taking something from me. My name is Jason Miller, and I've lived in the same quiet suburb outside of Cedar Ridge for most of my life. It's the kind of place where people wave when they drive by, where lawns get mowed on Saturdays like clockwork, and where the biggest excitement is usually someone getting a new mailbox. My house isn't anything special, just an older 2-story place my aunt left me when she moved into assisted living. I always meant to fix it up more, but life has a way of keeping things simple when you let it. Then the house next door got sold. The new owner was a guy named Derek Vaughn, and from the moment he moved in, you could feel the difference. He didn't just live there, he transformed the place into something that looked like it didn't belong in our neighborhood at all. Glass walls, steel edges, cameras everywhere, lights that turn on and off like the house was alive and watching you. People around here joked about it first, but there was always something uneasy underneath the jokes. I didn't have a problem with him at the beginning. Honestly, I barely paid attention until I started noticing him outside more often than seemed normal. He would walk the edge between our properties with a kind of focus that didn't match a casual stroll. Sometimes he had a measuring wheel, sometimes a clipboard, sometimes a contractor with him pointing at the ground like the earth itself was negotiable. One afternoon, I was out back watering the garden when I heard him talking to one of those guys. I wasn't trying to listen, but their voices carried over the fence. "If we shift the line just a bit, you gain almost 4 feet here," the contractor said. Derek nodded like he was thinking about moving furniture in a living room. "Wasted space otherwise," he said. I remember stopping right there with the hose still running in my hand, just staring at the fence like it had suddenly become thinner. 4 feet. He wasn't talking about abstract plans or surveys or legal boundaries. He was talking about my yard like it was an unused opportunity he was about to fix. I didn't say anything that day. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, that maybe I misunderstood. People don't just decide to take land, right? At least not in a neighborhood like this. But a few weeks later, I came home from work and saw the trucks. There were 3 of them parked along the curb, and a crew already digging along the side of my property. Not near it, not close to it, but inside it. I stood there for a moment just trying to make sense of what I was seeing, like my brain needed time to catch up. "Hey," I called out, walking over fast enough that my heart was already starting to pound. "What are you doing in my yard?" One of the workers shrugged and pointed toward Derek, who was standing a few feet away looking at his phone like none of this required his attention. I walked straight up to him. "Derek, what is going on here?" He looked up at me and smiled, not in a friendly way, more like someone amused that I was confused. "Oh, hey," he said. "Didn't think you'd be home yet." I gestured toward the digging. "Why are your guys on my property?" He tilted his head like I was the one misunderstanding something obvious. "It's not your property," he said. I actually laughed at first because I thought it had to be a joke. "What?" "I had a survey done," he said calmly. "Turns out the boundary line has been off for years. This section right here is mine." He said it so casually, like he was correcting a typo. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not true." He slipped his phone into his pocket and gave me this look like he had already decided how the conversation would end. "I get that it's surprising," he said, "but these things happen. Old records, outdated markers. Then why didn't you talk to me first?" I asked. He shrugged. "I didn't think it would be an issue." That was the moment something shifted. Not just anger, but this cold realization that he wasn't confused. He had already moved forward with this in his head long before I ever stepped outside. He tapped his shoe against the dirt where my garden used to be. "According to my survey, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I looked at the line of holes going through my yard, through the space my aunt used to plant flowers every spring, and I said, slowly, "Derek, you're about 3 feet inside my property." He didn't even flinch. "Then I guess we'll let the paperwork decide," he said. And just like that, he turned away like I was no longer part of the conversation. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop replaying how easy it was for him. Like taking land wasn't a conflict, just a correction waiting to happen. I kept thinking there had to be something I was missing, some detail that would make it all make sense. The next morning, I called the city, and that was the moment everything started to change. The city call was supposed to clear things up. That's honestly what I was hoping for. Like, I'd just get someone on the phone to say, "Yeah, don't worry, this is obviously your property," in a story. But instead, it turned into something a lot more complicated, the kind of answer that doesn't really help, but also doesn't let you relax either. The woman on the line listened quietly while I explained everything: the digging, the survey Derek claimed to have, the fence markers already being set into my yard. And when I finished, there was this pause, not dramatic, just careful, like she was choosing her words. "If he has a licensed survey," she said, "this may be a civil matter. You might need to resolve it legally unless there's a clear zoning violation." Civil matter. That phrase stuck with me more than I expected, because what it really meant was nobody was going to step in quickly, not unless I could prove something right away, and Derek knew that. I could almost feel that understanding settle in like a weight. Over the next few days, the fence went up fast. Clean, expensive wood panels, perfectly aligned, like it had been planned for months. From his side, it probably looked like progress, like upgrading his property line. From my side, it looked like someone had just erased part of my life and replaced it with a wall. I started noticing small things too. The way he still walked his property like nothing had changed. The way he would nod at me in the morning like we were still just normal neighbors, like we hadn't just had a conversation where he told me my land wasn't mine. That almost bothered me more than the actual fence. Because if he had been angry or defensive, at least it would have felt like a real conflict between two people. But this felt like he had already decided I was irrelevant. A few neighbors noticed the fence too. Mrs. Halvorson from across the street stopped me one afternoon while I was checking the mailbox. "That new fence is something," she said, squinting toward the yard. "Yeah," I replied. Apparently part of my property wasn't mine anymore. She frowned. "That doesn't sound right." "It doesn't," I said, and that was the end of that conversation, because nobody really knows what to say when something like that happens next door. That night, I sat in my kitchen longer than usual, just staring at the table, trying to figure out what my options actually were. I didn't have the kind of money where I could just jump into a long legal battle, and I didn't want to turn my life into a war over something that might drag on for years. That's when I remembered my aunt. Her name was Lorraine, and she used to work in city planning, the kind of job where she dealt with drainage systems, easements, zoning maps, all the invisible rules that decide how neighborhoods actually function. She wasn't the kind of person who talked big about her work, but she loved details. She kept everything. When she moved out, I had boxed up most of her basement without really going through it. Just stacked it away, thinking I'd deal with it someday. The next morning, I went down there. It smelled like old paper and dust, that heavy, quiet smell basements get when nothing has been touched in years. Everything was labeled in her handwriting, neat and precise, like she never trusted memory alone. Stormwater systems, 1998. Subdivision layouts. Utility revisions. Most of it meant nothing to me at first, just stacks of technical history. But I kept going, box after box, until I found a large rolled map tucked behind shelf. It had our neighborhood on it. Not just streets, but elevation lines, water flow markings. Shaded zones I didn't understand at first glance. I spread it across the old table and started tracing it with my eyes, slowly realizing this wasn't just a map, it was a system. And then I saw it, a diagonal line cutting through my yard and continuing right through Derek's property too. At first I thought it was just a boundary marker, but the notes beside it said something different. Easement, drainage flow, protected channel. I read it again and again. Then it clicked in a way that made my stomach tighten. That strip of land Derek had taken wasn't just mine. It wasn't just a disputed boundary. It was part of a drainage easement designed to carry stormwater through the entire block, which meant he hadn't just moved a fence 3 feet into my yard. He had built directly over a protected water flow zone. I leaned back from the table because suddenly everything I thought this was about changed. This wasn't just property anymore. This was infrastructure. And if I was right, Derek wasn't just wrong. He was in serious violation of city code. That night, I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt something else. Focus. So I started documenting everything. The next few days felt different, like I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something, and honestly, that shift scared me a little because I've never been the kind of person who plans a fight, but I also couldn't unsee what I had found in my aunt's maps. It was like someone had handed me the truth, and now everything else felt temporary. I went out early in the mornings when the street was still quiet, just me, a measuring tape, and my phone camera. I started at the fence line, then worked my way along the edge of the yard, marking distances, taking photos from every angle, even small things like where the ground sloped or where water naturally pooled after I ran the hose for a few minutes. And sure enough, the water didn't lie. It followed the exact path marked on the old drainage map, flowing right toward the section Derek had fenced in like it had been doing it long before either of us lived there. That was the moment it stopped feeling like an argument and started feeling like evidence. I didn't call Derek. I didn't confront him again. I went straight to the city engineering department, then flood control, then environmental compliance, and I sent everything I had, the photos, the maps, my notes, all of it laid out as plain as I could make it. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. And then I waited. I didn't expect it to move fast, but when it did, it moved all at once. On Monday morning, I heard trucks outside. Not construction trucks this time, city vehicles. Then more. By the time I stepped outside, there were inspectors in high-visibility vests walking across both properties like they had already been briefed before they arrived. Derek came out a few seconds later, and I'll never forget the look on his face, because for the first time since all of this started, he didn't look confident. He looked unsure. "What's going on here?" he asked, trying to sound in control. One of the inspectors didn't even look up from his clipboard. "We've received reports of possible easement violations and unpermitted construction," he said. "We need to conduct a full site review." That was the first crack. Derek turned slightly toward me like he expected me to say something, but I didn't, because at that point, I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. I was just watching it unfold. The inspection didn't take long to escalate. They measured everything, checked elevations, flagged distances, compared the fence line to official records pulled up on tablets. One of them followed the drainage slope and stopped right where the fence cut across it. Then they did something I didn't expect. They brought out a portable water tank and released flow simulation along the slope. We all stood there watching as the water moved naturally until it hit the fence and stopped dead, pooling where it wasn't supposed to pool. The inspector nodded once. "That's an obstruction," he said. "Clear violation of drainage easement requirements." Derek finally spoke up, his voice sharper now. "This is temporary. We were still adjusting things. It's not finalized. It doesn't matter." The inspector cut in. "It's built. It's blocking flow. That's a violation." And just like that, the tone shifted completely. Within an hour, they issued a stop work order. Bright orange notice slapped directly onto the fence like a mark that couldn't be ignored. I remember watching the paper flutter slightly in the wind and thinking how something so small could carry so much weight. But that wasn't even the end. Over the following weeks, more notices came. Formal ones, legal language, deadlines, corrections required. And as they dug deeper, it wasn't just the fence anymore. It was the deck too close to the easement line, the garage expansion partially built over restricted ground, the grading changes that altered how water flowed through the entire section of the neighborhood. Each one alone might have been fixable, but together they formed a pattern, a serious one. I didn't have to chase anything after that. The system did it on its own. Derek tried to push back at first. I saw it in the way he started pacing his yard again, talking faster on phone calls, contractors coming and going with less confidence each time. Lawyers showed up eventually, and I could hear fragments of conversations carried over the fence. Retroactive permits, noncompliance, risk of removal. And then one afternoon, he walked over to my side of the fence. He looked different now, not angry, not confident, just tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. He hesitated for a second, like he wasn't used to not having control of the conversation. "Look," he said, "this is getting out of hand. If there was a misunderstanding about the line, we can fix it. Move the fence back, sort it out. No need to escalate further." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how different his tone was from the day he told me it wasn't my yard. I said, "Derek, you told me to talk to a lawyer." That landed. He exhaled slowly. I was just confident, he said. There was a long pause after that. Then I said, it's not just the fence. He frowned. What do you mean? I looked at him and realized this was the moment everything had already passed the point of negotiation. You built over a drainage easement, I said. You changed how water moves through this entire block. For the first time, he didn't have a reply ready. And that was when I knew it was over. The official orders came shortly after that. Full removal. No adjustments, no compromises, no fix it later. They took the fence down first, then the deck. Then parts of the garage had to be dismantled piece by piece, like the house was being corrected in real time. By the end of it, the structure didn't look like it had before at all. It looked incomplete, exposed, like something that had been forced to admit it was never built right in the first place. The financial hit was massive. I heard numbers around $300,000, and none of it covered by insurance because of permits and violations. After that, things changed quickly. Derek stopped talking to me completely. A few weeks later, a for sale sign went up in the yard, and then one morning I saw movers. He was gone not long after that. The last thing the city did was come back and place permanent boundary markers along the true property line, concrete set deep into the ground, official, final, impossible to argue with. I stood there when they finished, just looking at them, thinking about how something that started with 3 feet of dirt ended with an entire house being taken apart piece by piece. And I keep going back to one question. Was it justice, or did it go too far? Because if I'm honest, all I did was report what was there. But everything after that, that was the system doing what it's designed to do. Now I'll ask you the same thing. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have fought it, or let go to keep the peace?